Thank you for watching this webinar on breaking into consulting, how to prepare and best practices. This webinar will take you through tips and preparations and best practices on how to break into consulting, an overview of the industry, resumes, cover letters fit, and case interviews. So for those of you who are interested in pursuing a career in consulting, this webinar can hopefully give you some advice and takeaways to make you successful in your application process. So just for those who maybe are interested in consulting, but not really sure what consulting entails or what it is, consulting is basically the business of providing expert advice to a specific group of people. So as a consultant, you're someone who has some level of expertise that a particular group, specifically more likely a company, is willing to pay for your expertise because they find it valuable and they want access to that expertise and knowledge. And so the true meaning of consulting is really helping to solve problems, usually business problems, and helping a company or a group of individuals move from their current state to their desired state. I also want to touch on the different types of consulting, just so you know what are the other options available to you. I know that a lot of times when you think of consulting, you think of management consulting, which includes the big four and boutique firms. But I also wanted to touch on internal consulting, independent consulting, and tech consulting in case some of you may find those options of interest to you as well. So internal consulting is when you're actually hired as an employee of a company and you work on strategic and operational problems for that specific company. So you're able to take a deep dive into core issues, understand the operations, product, strategy, policies, and culture of that company. And so instead of working with other diverse companies, you're really focusing on the company that you're hired within, but you're working on various business projects and problems that that company would have. So some of the companies that commonly hire for internal consultants would be American Express, Disney, IBM, and Google. A good example would be IBM. So they would hire their consultants for their internal consulting group so that these consultants can work with IBM clients and be able to sell them on maybe some new platforms or resources or offerings that they would have, or troubleshoot any sort of issues that their client is having with their product. So that is how you would be an internal consultant for a specific company. There's also independent consulting. So if you've developed expertise in an area, you certainly can build and run your own business around that expertise. So instead of joining a firm or a company as an internal consultant, you can start your own practice and start building up your clientele, and they can hire you for your expertise and you work for yourself. You can make your own hours. And so it really gives you more flexibility and freedom. I think the downside would be that you would have to build your clientele and you don't have the name of a company to back you when you're starting out. And lastly, I want to touch on tech consulting. So if some of you may think that tech consulting and strategy consulting are the same thing, they're really not. Tech consulting is really about process analysis. So mapping out a current process, figuring out what's wrong with it, and then determining a new process. So common business problems tech consultants face are usually supply chain project, customer facing, ordering website, or back-end employee time tracking systems for a company. And sometimes it's usually hard to transfer from a tech consulting position to a strategy, because once you're in tech, the strategy consultants kind of see you in a certain box and it's hard to get out of it, because for strategy consulting, you really need to be able to see big picture and make recommendations and strategic moves on a higher level. While tech consulting, you're usually really focused on a specific issue or process, and it's more in the weeds with a certain issue. So if you really like that and you really enjoy kind of figuring out what's wrong with a certain process and then determining what it should be and really being in the weeds with that, then tech consulting might be another option for you as well. But for today's purposes, I'm only going to focus on management consulting because that seems to be the one of the most interest, but also the ones that we tend to think about most when we think of consulting for students. So within management consulting, we also want to talk about strategy versus implementation. So strategy is really the what should we do, and implementation is how do we do it. So strategy is probably the most well-known segment, even though it's the smallest. And the strategy consultants work on the most pressing business issues, so like revenue growth, cost cutting, M&A, and you work directly with the CEO. The pros of strategy consulting is that you get broad industry exposure because you work with so many different companies and within different industries. You also solve different kinds of business problems. So you really get the knowledge and exposure to different problems and gain the expertise to solve diverse issues. And there's just incredible exit opportunities as a strategy consultant. Once you decide to go back into corporate or to pursue something else, you really have a vast array of opportunities available to you within corporate or even government. And these are short projects, so roughly about 2 weeks, a lot of travel. You work in teams, usually smaller teams than implementation, and you work on a project. You go to where your client is at, you look up data, you analyze, and you make your recommendations, and then you move on. So you never really get to see the end result of that strategy. However, once that strategy is made, and if the company decides to move forward, this is where the implementation consultants would come in. So you implement the strategy that has been decided on. And this team is the team that would be creating the operating structures to help the client reach their goal. So you actually iterate in real time the strategy that was recommended to ensure that it's an actual effective real world solution. Because remember, with recommendation is a solution based on data and of best decisions of what would happen, of course of action that would be the best results. Implementing it could be a very different story. So this implementation team is really there to make sure that it actually is an effective real world solution. And you're really working on day-to-day processes of running a business. You implement new systems or special projects. And as opposed to strategy, which are short projects, these are long, complex projects because you're now implementing processes rather than just finding a solution and presenting a recommendation. Now you actually have to put it into action. So depending on if you like short-term projects and just moving on and working on different projects at different industries, or if you like really long projects and being able to actually implement the strategy, it just depends on which one you prefer and better suited for what you would like to do. So the industry, I wanted to also touch on who the firms that you would most likely want to target and apply to. So the top 3, the most prestigious are Bain, BCG, and McKinsey. And they are usually known as MBB for short. And they're mainly strategy, but they also have broad services. And then you have the strategy firms. So you have EY Parthenon, which is actually a sub of EY. So EY is an accounting, finance, and technology firm, but like I said, they have a strategy arm, and you'll see that other firms may have a strategy arm as well and call it a different name. So EY strategy would be EY Parthenon, and there's Kearney, and strategy and is PwC's strategy arm, Oliver Wyman, and LEK. And then you have your accounting, finance, and technology firms, which include Accenture, Booz Allen, Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, and EY. And then you have your more industry-focused HR nonprofit firms. So for those of you who maybe have an HR or nonprofit background, or if you have a specific industry background and still want to go into consulting, there's definitely opportunities for you within these firms. So Mercer is one of the larger, well-known HR consulting firms. And then you have Bridgespan Group, Clearview, which is healthcare, and then Gartner. Just to name a few. There's definitely a lot more firms out there, but just to give you an idea of what the industry looks like. So application timeline. So there's definitely a time frame when firms are recruit from undergrad and graduate programs. And so I wanted to give you an overview of when you should start really researching, networking, and putting your application. So you really want to start researching the industry starting in May through September. And during the summer is also when you want to start networking. So once you find out what target firms you're looking at, look to see if you have connections within those firms. And if not, this is where you want to start networking. And then you also want to make sure you're looking at application dates so that you know when their summer internships applications are, or if you're graduating, when the dates are due, application dates are due for their full-time roles. And then once fall rolls around, you'll want to start preparing your resume and cover letter, which I will touch on some tips and best practices in a little bit. You also then want to prepare for your case interviews. Attend any info sessions that the firm is having, and definitely check out USC's event schedule to see if any of the firms are coming to campus. And then drop your resume by September, October, and hopefully you'll get your interview and prepare for the fit interviews, the case interview, and the interviews happen around October, November, and you should get your offers by November and December. Resume and cover letter. So consulting industry definitely has their own preference of resumes and how they like their cover letters. So I'm going to touch on the structure and how you should structure and the content for your resumes and cover letters. So your resume. So what matters on the resume really? So what they're really looking for is, so under your education, they're really looking for pedigree. So a top school, and then also your performance. So your GPA and any honors or awards that you've received. And then for experience, they're really looking for brand name experience. If you don't have brand name experience or brand name company, that's okay. Really then try to market and sell your analytical ability, business understanding, and of course, any with distinction. So employee awards, or if there was something that you made a recommendation and it was implemented, you then want to make sure that you specify that as well. And then there's a leadership section. And this is where you can put in your class projects or clubs that you're a part of where you actually held a leadership role. So you want to talk about if you led a team, how big that team was, if you oversaw budget, how much that budget was, the impact of the project or your role within the club. And you want to make sure that these are still professional, so professional clubs and professional projects. So what consultants look for. So within the structure that I just went over, so for experience and leadership, really try to include 1 to 2 diverse experiences. So you don't want to pull just only from your academics or just from your work experience. You really want to pull from diverse areas of your background. They also want to see Excel skills. And then 1 to 2 substantial leadership roles, as I mentioned. So it could be like 1 club and then 1 project, or maybe it's you're on a board of some sort for your company or something like that. And then employee or academic awards, and of course your top scores. So here's the resume structure that we recommend. Definitely have a heading, so your name and your contact information. You would then have your education section, your experience section, then the leadership. And then if you have publications or presentations you want to include, that you could put that under leadership. And then personal is definitely something that consulting firms really like to see. So as opposed to corporate or other types of resumes where you may hear to take off the personal, for consulting applications and resumes, we really recommend actually including a personal or interest section, because I really like to see who you are and what are the things outside of school and work that make you you. And so within each of the diverse experiences, there's some suggestions on how you can structure your bullet points. So you want to definitely include context. So the company, the group, or the team, and the numbers. the number of members or the budget that you were working with. And then you want to include one action word per line, and then definitely include your achievements. So outcomes, awards, projections, and you can please quantify anything that you can. So team members, months that you were on a project, monetary value of what you were working on, or if you made money or helped save money or cost savings, the percentage of that. So the selection process. So really, resumes and applications fall into 3 buckets. So you have the A list. So those are applicants who networked and was liked by a partner. And so they definitely go in the A list bucket. High ranking candidates. So if you did a really great application and resume. Pre-selected candidates are those who maybe went to an info session or career fair and met with a recruiter. And so they've been chosen, or you've networked with an associate level consultant and they also flagged you. And then a pro list of people who you were an intern, or maybe you have a network or relationship with the firm already, you would go in the A list as well. So the no thank yous would include the con list. So that would include people maybe who just had a really bad application or resume is completely off. Maybe just people that aren't a good fit for the firm, and of course the low ranking candidates. And then the maybes are the medium ranking. So your resume or application wasn't too bad, but wasn't what they were looking for to be the A list. So you would be in the maybes. And then those rescues from the no bucket. So let's say, for instance, you just happened to not do a great resume or application, but let's say you partnered, you network with a partner or with some alumni, you could get rescued into the maybe pile because of that network. Or if you network with a partner, you can be put in the A list bucket. So that's why networking for consulting is very important. So cover letter structure. So your cover letter really should be 1 page. And there's 2 format options for you. You can go chronological, which means that you'll have your paragraphs with education, leadership, experience paragraphs, and the last paragraph should be why the firm. If you decide for the bullet format, you want to start with your intro. Your intro would be that you're a student and that you're interested in this particular position. Then you would go with why the firm. And then your leadership and experience would be in bullet points instead of in paragraphs, and you would have your conclusion. So you would have 4 to 6 paragraphs, 3 to 4 bullets, depending on which format you decide to go with. And you would have 4 to 5 lines max for each bullet. So you don't want to go over, and so just to make sure that you're being concise. And for each example, so each paragraph or for each bullet, you want to have 1 to 2 illustrations describing context, action, and results, ideally from 2 different experiences. So if you're doing the paragraph format, then each paragraph really should be maybe 1, 2 at most illustration. I probably would go with 1. And then this is where you can describe context, action, and results. And you want your 2 different paragraphs to be from 2 different experiences. If you were doing the bullet format, then I would also recommend 1 bullet for each experience, and with 4 to 5 lines max for each bullet. So for instance, for example, you can have your first paragraph be an experience from your leadership, and then the second paragraph can be your experience from your work experience. And for your bullets, if you wanted to have 3 to 4, you could include 1 leadership, 1 experience, and maybe 1 from your degree program per se. And then why the firm? So this is the really important paragraph. You definitely don't want to skip this one. And you really want to be specific and you want to personalize this. This is where networking could really help, because then you can add in information that you learned from your informational interview. And so it's more than just reiterating what was on the website or something that you could have heard from an info session. It's really more about, why are you choosing the firm specifically? What is it about this firm that really interests you? And then of course you want to vary your word choice. You don't want to keep saying, I believe, I believe, I believe. You want to have some word choices that are varied. So let's talk about fit interviews. So now that you've got your resume in and you've got the call that you're going to be interviewed, most likely you're going to start with your fit interviews. So the three things that firms look for in the fit interview is basically, are you a good communicator? And the thought process behind that is, if you can't communicate clearly in an interview, then how will you do it in front of a Fortune 500 CEO, right? Because remember, as a consultant, you're working with high level individuals at a company. And so you have to be comfortable speaking with CEOs, VPs, and individuals on the leadership team. The second thing they're looking for is, are you an effective hard worker? Because as a consultant, you're working long hours already. And so they really want to make sure that you can put in the hours, but you're doing so in a smart way. You're not just working long hours and not doing things in a smart way and just kind of working long, but with nothing to show for it. And then lastly is the interviewee a positive, generally likable person. So firms want to hire someone that they want to work with, right? So just like any regular interview, they're really trying to see, are you someone who would be a good culture fit for the firm? And you're someone that could fit in well with the team and they can spend 8 hours a day with, even more so than 8 hours. So one of the things that I've learned that they do is called the airport test. And for those of you who don't know the airport test is basically, are you someone who, if a consultant sat next to you at the airport while you're both waiting for your flights and started talking to you, would you be someone who could keep their interest, they would be interested in talking to you and continue to talk to, and generally have a good conversation with? So that's the airport test. And I've actually seen it done where students who are interviewing and they're waiting in the lobby or reception area, waiting to be called in for the interview. And someone would just come in and pretend that they're also waiting and sit down next to you and the student and just start making small talk and start making conversation. And you think they're just someone coming in to also see someone or for a meeting, and you're just making conversation, but really that's the airport test right there. That's the beginning of your fit interview. So I would just make sure that you're always on when you're there, and don't think that because you're waiting in the reception area that no one's watching you. So always just be ready to go and just always be likable and ready to have good conversation. So the 3 questions to prepare for your fit interview. So the first one is, walk me through your resume. And why is this important? So it introduces your story, right? They have your resume already, but they really want to hear about your journey and your story of how you got to where you are today. And it makes the first impression, but also demonstrates communication. Are you able to be concise while also being able to explain your story in a way that is easily understandable and conveys what you're trying to communicate? So what do you want to do actually? You want to highlight 3 to 5 experiences. Now this is different from your resume or cover letter where you've already gone into deep dives, right? This is where you can actually include what happened. We talk briefly why this happened, and be able to give more of the color and background of the experience. So you can again bring in the numbers, like, I led a team of 5. We were trying to accomplish this, but this time you can actually bring in more of your personality and really talk about how this experience changed you or what you learned from it. And you want to go in chronological order and just make sure you don't rush through your story. The second question is, why the role? Again, why is this important? Because it demonstrates understanding of the job that you're actually applying to, and it really answers the question that they're asking, which is, why the firm and why should we hire you? So they want to make sure that you know what you're applying for and what you're about to hopefully get yourself into as a consultant. And so you're trying to make sure that you're actually someone who understands the role and it's something that you actually really want to do. So how you prepare, what you actually want to do to answer this question. You definitely don't want to make it all about you. You don't want to just have one simple reason. A good answer could be, 3 reasons. I really like data analytics. I love strategy. I love problem solving. That's fine. But a better answer would be, let me tell you a story, right? So talk about what maybe happened to you to get you involved in consulting, or what do you love about consulting? And if you can put a personal experience or story to it, that would be the best way to answer this question. And lastly is why the firm. And again, why it's important, it demonstrates insider status. Again, you've done your homework and you found other information than what's on the website about why the firm. And this is where networking and talking to someone on the inside is really important to get that insider information. And again, it answers the question, why should we hire you? Because you've done your research and you really understand what the firm does, its mission, its vision, maybe its values, and you can talk about why you chose them. It's because it's aligned with maybe your values, or you really enjoy their CSR, whatever other information that you can relate it to yourself, right? So again, what to do? Don't make it all about you. You don't want to have just one simple reason, like, oh, you came to campus and so I found it really interesting. Again, you don't want to just have 3 reasons. It's fine to have just three good reasons, but always the best way to go about it is telling a story. So again, relate it back to you. It'd be great if you could talk about, your information session with an alum or whoever you talk to, and be able to recount what that conversation entailed in terms of really making you interested about the firm. So how to practice for fit interviews and how to prepare. So really what you want to make sure you have is clarity, right? So structure and clear responses. So writing out 30 seconds to 1 minute responses, just write it out first to make sure that they're structured and they're clear. You also want to have personal stories and anecdotes. So you want to, again, relate it back to you and your history and background, and discuss lessons learned is also really important too. You want to be authentic. You don't want to make something up. You want to make sure that it is something that pertains to you and is real. And of course, you want to incorporate positivity, and it's always that likability factor. So after you've written out your 30 seconds and 1 minute responses, add natural intros to these prepared stories so that it comes off natural and authentic. Practice with the timer to make sure that you are sticking to the 30 or 1 minute responses, 30 seconds to 1 minute response. Use summaries and structure. So you don't want to have to give the whole story because that may take too long. Definitely just make sure that you're summarizing and there's a structure to everything. So it makes sense. So context, action, and results. If you're telling a story, you want to make sure there's a beginning, middle, and end, right? And then give feedback on your presentation. Practice with someone, have them give you feedback on how you answered it, and if they understood it or your story quickly. And so how you can structure these stories are really your hero stories. So strengths and weaknesses, touching on natural intros to prepared stories that talk about either a strength or a weakness, and then what you learned from that, right? So I would choose hero stories that you've taken from your leadership section, academic, and your work experience. And of course, you're just always answering the question, why should we hire you? Okay, case interviews. So some people might think that the case interview holds more weight than the fit interview. It's actually equal. So you definitely want to make sure you practice your fit interviews as much as you practice your case interviews. So case interviews. I wanted to go over the core frameworks that would be really helpful for you to know really well, because really any of these frameworks can answer case questions that you get. So some common ones are market entry, profitability, mergers and acquisitions. So market entry is, helping clients decide whether to enter new markets. And you're really looking at the situation of the market, state of the competition, process, and strategies. And with profitability, it's ways to improve profitability, right? So looking at cost to revenue, price, volume, variable costs, and fixed costs. And then with mergers and acquisitions, you're advising a company when they're considering merging with acquiring or being acquired by another company. So you're looking at market, target company, post-acquisition strategies, risks, and benefits. So the reason why I'm talking about these core frameworks is because if you know how to structure these frameworks in a case interview and kind of know how to go and use each of these frameworks, then you really can't answer any case question that is provided to you. So for example, this is a case question that was given. Your client makes popular organic snacks, including snack bars, organic bite-sized chocolates, and organic chips. The client has strong distribution in North America and has been in operation for 8 years. The company's overall revenues last year were $600 million with 2,000 employees. The client is interested in accelerating growth. What should they consider? So if you got this question during a case interview, and let's say, for instance, you're just like, oh, I don't really know what to do, but you remember that you studied the core frameworks. So any of these could actually be the answer to help you structure your recommendation, right? Because this company is looking to accelerate growth. So it could be market entry. Maybe they can help, they could decide whether to enter a new market or not. Maybe from North America, they can enter Europe or Asia market. Maybe you decide to go with profitability. So ways to improve profitability. So then you would tell your case partner that you would look at cost of revenue, price, volume, and those factors. Or maybe you decide to go with M&A, and maybe your recommendation is for the company to consider merging with or acquiring another company. Maybe they wanted to expand on their offerings, and instead of and so they include, instead of snack bars, organic bite-sized chocolates, maybe now they also want to include organic fruit candy or something. But basically, maybe they're thinking of diversifying their offerings and their products. So 3 evaluation categories. For your case interviews, you're evaluated on structure, problem solving, and communication. So this is an actual scoring key from a case interview that was used by a firm. And so you can see just from the scoring that if you don't recap the background, which we'll go into in the next few slides, then you automatically get a score of 1, right? If you recap the background, but with too much detail or lack confidence, you get scored a 2. So really, they're really looking for you to be able to provide clear, concise, structured responses. And if you need 1 to 3 clarifying questions, because they're going to give you a lot of information that you may not need. And so they're really trying to see if you can structure the information that's given to you, be able to parse out which information or data that you actually need to make the recommendation, and be able to problem solve and communicate your recommendation. So here's the structure that what we recommend that you follow for your case interviews. So your case partner is going to, or case interviewer is going to give you the background as I just did with the example. You want to recap the background and just make sure you understand what is being asked of you. So you want to say, okay, I'm just going to make sure that, I understand what the situation is. And so you say, this is a organic company who makes organic snacks and chips with this amount of revenue, and they want to expand. Is that correct? And so you want to make sure that you have the company down correctly, and you have the most important is you have the problem that they want you to solve correct. Because I think sometimes we hear all of the data and then we forget what the actual problem is that they're looking for you to recommend a solution for, okay? The next thing you want to ask is objective clarification questions. So for instance, if it's North America, a clarifying question could be, I'm assuming that in this case, North America means US and Canada. Is this accurate? So just things that you might want more information on, or just make sure you're on the right track. So you can't ask 1 to 3 clarifying questions. And then you want to take the grand pause, which is where you want to really take your time to do all the mental math that you need to do, make sure that you have all of the information that you need, and you come up with your game plan. And these are all on your notes. So you also want to make sure that you're keeping really clean notes, because they will take them for you. And then you want to give them the case close of, okay, so based on this information, this is what I looked at. And this is where you can make your assumptions with numbers. And then of course, don't forget the final recommendation. I've seen students where they come up with this great game plan, all of the data that they collected and what they looked at, and at the very end, they never make the recommendation. So even if you think you're going down a complete wrong path, it's okay. They just want to see the process. How do you think? How do you come up with the numbers, or what are you actually looking at? And then even if your recommendation is wrong, and there is no right or wrong answer for case interviews, they just want to see how you got to your recommendation and what is your recommendation. So how to prepare for case interviews? Practice, practice, practice. It really is about practicing out loud, and if you can, with a partner, because it's really beneficial to have someone there with you who can actually time you, or maybe ask you those clarifying questions, or be able to let you know when you are maybe talking too much, or maybe the grand pause is too long. There's also lots of free resources out there and free cases that you can practice on. I would again review the case structures or the case frameworks that was mentioned earlier, so that no matter what case question is thrown at you, you can always use one of those frameworks as your answer. And then be comfortable with mental math. So you have to be able to really do math quickly because you're not gonna have a calculator with you. So really try to, if you're gonna be assuming numbers, try to think numbers that could be easily divided or multiplied and so forth. You may want to go in knowing the population of large or major countries. So for instance, if you were working on that case example, knowing the population of US and Canada would be really helpful. Or if you decide to do market entry, and maybe knowing the population of Russia or France would be helpful too if you were thinking to recommend breaking into the European market. Be comfortable with the unknown or making assumptions. You have to know that there is no right answer, and it's all about just making numbers. And so for instance, if you say, okay, so if the population of US is this, then I'm just going to assume that 80% eat organic snacks and chips. So you have to be able to be comfortable making assumptions and just going with it. And lastly, it's not about the correct answer, but the process. They're really just trying to see, when you're given a case with, limited data, what data are you looking for? What is it that you think is the data that you need, and the process that you got to your recommendation? So, like I said, they're really just trying to see how you think and if you can think like a consultant. So thank you so much. I hope this was helpful, and good luck to you, and thank you for joining.